if you want to ask them to come forward.
네, 앞좌석 많이 비어 있으니까 앞에 오셔서 앉아주시기 바랍니다.
Excuse me. Okay. I get the message. Yeah, I know. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of African Development Bank, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Bonjour. Bon dia. Anyang seo, to speak some Korean. Welcome to the beautiful city of Busan. And welcome to the special event of the African Leadership for Agriculture, whose theme this year is From Corn to Cornflakes, promoting agro-industrialization in Africa through processing zone. A theme that's quite fitting with this year's annual meeting's main topic, which is about accelerating industrialization on the continent. For some of you who read what the bank does, you know, one of the high five of the bank is to industrialize our beautiful continent. So we're delighted to be here and to focus on a very important sector, which is agriculture. Let me begin by recognizing among us the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akumi Adesina, who is here showing once again his commitment to the sector, but also to feeding Africa. Thank you, Dr. Adesina. We are also delighted to be joined by members of the boards but also by ministers from Africa, and the Minister of Finance of Uganda, the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria. We also joined by private sector players, members of the civil society, research organizations, academia, pretty much all the stakeholders that are important to make this event a successful event today. This demonstrates one more time that the African Leadership for Agriculture, it's a network, it's a community, it's a family that comes together to make sure that agriculture plays a major role in moving Africa forward, and that's why we're delighted to have all of you today. So thank you for being here. And to borrow a very famous expression, let's make agriculture cool and great again. And that's why we're delighted to have people that will make the sector cool and great. And we're delighted to have you all here to contribute in making this sector a very, very important sector going forward in moving our continent and unlocking the potential. This initiative is possible thanks to a number of players. Let me recognize the Rockefeller Foundation, led here by its regional director, Mamadou Biteye. Mamadou will give a round of applause, Mamadou. It's also possible because of the Initiative for Global Development, represented here by Mima. Mima, why are you in the room? Mima, thank you. And of course, we're blessed to have the support of the African Union. We believe that leadership is very important in moving the sector forward. So thank you to our organization, the African Union, obviously. And last but not least, to the African Development Bank for actually housing and hosting and boosting this initiative and make it possible for us to be together today. Now, without further ado, given the limited time we have for the President here, I'd like to call upon Mr. Mamadou Biteye, the Regional Director of Rockefeller Foundation for Africa, to give us his opening remark. Mr. Biteye, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, Ministers of Agriculture and Ministers of Finance of Africa, Mr. Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Mima Nedeljković, ladies and gentlemen from the private sector, from civil society, I would like to extend a warm welcome to this year's Leadership for Agriculture Network Forum. I would like first to really thank Akin for hosting us and for the way you have worked us as a foundation, lending your shepherding hand to the L4Ag network and working to strengthen its mandate and positioning on the continent. AfDB has provided L4Ag with the necessary endorsement, evident through ongoing efforts as the network secretariat is hosting high-level meetings for policymakers such as this one and disseminating their outcomes and driving coordination and accountability on Malabo Declaration. Let me also thank you, Akin, for your own personal leadership on the African agricultural space, which was again recognized through an honorary doctorate from Michigan State University conferred upon you just earlier this month. Receive our hearty congratulations. We know this will add to the influence you are having in helping to address food security and agriculture issues, among others, in Africa and beyond. To Dr. Mima Nedeljković, IGD President, we are grateful to you and your team for ably executing this forum. You have been a great partners in our work on agriculture in Africa. We are pleased to be associated with your work. It's a great honor, ladies and gentlemen, to be here, to see the network go from strength to strength, grown in numbers and influence. I'm also very pleased to see many esteemed colleagues and partners working on Africa's agriculture, as well as private sector. Thank you for prioritizing the work of the network and for taking the time to join us this afternoon. This forum is yet another milestone in the growth of L4AG, which was conceived during the Rockefeller Foundation Centennial in 2013, and then launched in 2015 together with IFAD, the International Fund for Agriculture Development, and the African Union Commission. By now, many of you know L4AG's history, so I will not go into details. Allow me, though, to mention its objectives, which remain even more relevant today as the network grows, with 12 African members and counting. The network's objectives are to promote strategic networking amongst member ministers and a variety of stakeholders with a view to increase commitment to investing in agriculture. It is also to enable members to learn from each other on ways in which they can frame their respective objectives and initiatives in a way that can get ministers of finance on board, to actually stop seeing the sector as a place that really takes a lot of subsidies, but looking at it more as an investment that will yield actually return in 3, 5, 10 years, but being seen as a strategic place actually where you can drive inclusive growth and high return. And also to provide a space for members to learn from the best and most innovative success cases in Africa and beyond, and that can be replicated internally. So the call for an African agricultural transformation still rings loudly, and we are all compelled to play a role. I acknowledge that there are many platforms for collaboration, but most of them tend to be respective to countries. L4AG is a distinct network in the sense that it is a partnership across ministries and institutions and countries and across the continent. This means that L4AG is full of potential, and we expect so much from it as we make incremental progress towards Africa's green revolution. And this means we expect so much from you who are here today. Today, you can expect to discuss what policies and instruments we should consider as we strive to industrialize Africa's agriculture, and how the public and private sectors can collaborate to accelerate investments in agribusiness to meet Africa's agriculture needs: food, feed, nutrition, and job creation. At this juncture, I would like to recognize our private sector partners who are in attendance. You were invited deliberately because you have the power to make a difference. And we welcome your contribution in today's deliberations and beyond when you go back to your spheres of influence. In keeping with our theme, development of agro-processing zones is a key solution towards solving the issue of food security, as well as the challenge of food loss. Over 40% of the produce from the continent is lost along the value chain, partly due to the absence of hard infrastructure to process perishable products into high-value products. If we make the right investment in agro-processing, we will keep the twin benefits of putting more money into the farmer's pocket and reduce food loss. Consequently, we can save more food to feed part of the 59 million children under 5 years who are stunted due to chronic and recurrent malnutrition, and whose devastating effects of stunting can last a lifetime. Another avenue that is available to us is AGRA, and today we also want to deliberate on how L4AG can be a platform to advance AGRA's transformation agenda through its current strategy, which covers 11 countries in Africa. This has potential for wider knowledge transfer and scaling up of successful solutions as we progress towards meeting our goals. Ladies and gentlemen, as we spend this afternoon together discussing how the network can contribute to Africa's agriculture, industrialization, I would like to emphasize that we will deliberate on ensuring clarity on our respective roles in delivering on this. In today's last session, which I will moderate, we shall dive deeper into what our priority thematic areas for the next 3 years should be, so that when we return to our stations, we can spend our time, efforts, and investment more strategically. We hope to depart today with sound understanding on the scope of work ahead, tangible outcomes that we can deliver on with accountability. This is in addition to a renewed commitment to join together to use the network as a platform through which we can have greater impact in feeding Africa as well as creating jobs in the agricultural sector. African governments can act on policies and decisions long talked about, but pending execution, and create strategies to help those countries reduce food loss. So the last thing I would say is that we really look forward to that engagement so that we are having really that common agenda that we can drive over the next 3 years. I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
I am mindful that the time of the president is actually limited, and I'm hoping that Mima will have a shorter speech after this so that we can actually get the president to hear his welcome remarks. So, Mima, just for a quick active remarks, and then we'll invite the president for the last word. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, all protocols observed. The time is short. I just want from the private sector side to welcome all and to really say in the end, the whole point of leadership for agriculture is about bringing the public sector, the private sector, civil society together, recognizing their interests are fully aligned to make agro-industry a growth sector. That's what it's all about. We initiate global development. We're a network of business leaders worldwide, very strong in agro-industry, and we very much applaud, as we've seen with the President, we have a very close relationship with the African Development Bank. We're proud of it with Rockefeller Foundation, and I can assure you I will be speaking later and will reserve my comments that it's all about making agriculture cool, and it's a business. It's a growth sector. That's what it's all about. With that, thank you very much. Short enough?
Nima, thank you for keeping it short. Thank you very much. I am actually now delighted to actually welcome the President of the African Development Bank for his opening remark in setting the scene for our afternoon session. Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mima, that's how private sector people act, pretty fast, straight to the point. Well, let me welcome you very much, Governor from Uganda, Minister of Finance, the Minister of Agriculture from Nigeria, Chief Adu Ogbe. Let me welcome all other governors of the bank that are here. Let me welcome the young people that are in agriculture that are here. It's great to see you, Mima. We appreciate very much the IGD partnership with us, and also the African Union for their support for this work. Of course, our Vice President for Agriculture is here, Jennifer Blanke and her team. They're smiling and looking good on that side of the meeting. I'm not going to take much time because I have the governors of the bank waiting for me at the meeting. I just want to make about 4 points. First is the fact that the leadership for agriculture is so crucial, and AGRA also represented here. Thank you very much for being here, Sibanda. It is so crucial for us to have leadership for agriculture. You cannot say you have leadership on agriculture if you have 65% of all the arable land left to feed 9 billion people in the world, and we are just sitting on it. That's not leadership. What we have to do is to use that leadership to unlock the potential of that agriculture and to unlock massive amount of wealth for the people in Africa. That's the first part of leadership. The second part of leadership is to look at the nature of problems we have. And I have a saying in my local language in Nigeria that says that elders cannot be in an open market and watch the head of the baby slump at the back of the mother. So babies, people carry babies on their backs so that when their head go this way, elders always tell you, no, that's not the right way to go. I say that because of a particular problem, which is malnutrition and stunting. It's not just about just getting agriculture right. we must make sure that we solve the problem of malnutrition and stunting in Africa. Stunting especially because today you have roughly 54 million African kids that are stunted. And if you have stunted kids today, you're going to have stunted economies tomorrow. And so the most important thing is just the brain infrastructure, what I call gray matter infrastructure. We've got to start building that gray matter infrastructure and make sure that we are actually getting more nutritious food to our kids and they can grow up to be the full potential that they have. So please, as you look at leadership for agriculture, that leadership must attack that problem of malnutrition and stunting that is very important. The third one is that leaders cannot watch also why potential goes to waste. Now, when I talk of potential, you take a look, for example, about the savannas of Africa. The savannas of Africa today are the most underutilized resource that you will find anywhere in the world. Roughly about 400 million hectares, that's the size of the savannas that we have, that can be cultivated. But only 10% of that is actually cultivated. So which means that what Africa does with its savannas, what Africa does with its agriculture, will not just determine how Africa feeds itself, but it will determine how the world actually feeds itself. So there has to be a lot of work and thinking on how is it that we can optimize that savanna and make sure that we unlock that potential for Africa and for the rest of the world. The other thing that I want to say for leadership for agriculture is how to finance agriculture. I think Mima said it very well. Agriculture is not a way of life. Agriculture is not a development activity. Agriculture is not a social sector. Agriculture is a business. And therefore, we must look at agriculture as a business and make sure that we are making investments from, all the way from the farm straight to the supermarkets and so on, and turn agriculture into a real wealth-creating sector. Finally, leaders must always prepare the generation after them. And when you take a look at Africa today, we must do that in terms of agriculture. When you look at the composition of the agricultural sector today, largely dominated by a lot of old folks, but everybody eats food. I don't see anybody smoking gas. I don't see anybody drinking oil, but I see everybody eating food. And so the food business is a big business. And this sector is going to grow big time to roughly, a sector by 2030, that'll be about $1 trillion. So if you're looking at money, making money, that is the sector to be. And I'm glad that the ministers of finance are here. What I would like to request for them is for you to actually have instruments that get young people into agriculture as a business. I will say it again, agriculture is the coolest business that you ever found. It is cool, it's very sexy, it's the best thing you ever found. So please get into agriculture as a business. I am known as an evangelist for that, and so let me preach from my pulpit on this particular issue. And finally, I just want to say about the nature of partnerships. Partnerships matter a lot, and that's why you hear from the private sector, from AGRA, our folks are here. We have our folks and colleagues from the World Bank and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and others that are here. We have launched a program that's called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. That is called TAT, and that initiative is going to try and take technologies to scale with AGRA, with World Bank, with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and other partners, so that we can reach literally millions of farmers, the best technologies that are possible. And today you find that the TAT is about $1 billion of investment that we are going to make there. So I'm very, very happy to be here. I want to commend you very much, Mohammed Biteye, my brother from Rockefeller Foundation, to once again thank Rockefeller Foundation for the vision, for the commitment, and your own personal consistency and support in this. So kindly transmit to Radsha, your president, our sincere appreciation. And I know that with the kind of leaders that we have here, from Nigeria, from Tanzania, and from all over, I'm sure at the end of this day, we'll be able to map out the right path to show the critically needed leadership for agriculture in Africa. I wish you a very good session. Enjoy it, and have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. President, for reminding us once again that agriculture can be cool, it can be run as a business. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to give another big round of applause to the President as he exits. Now, without further ado, with the president setting the scene for us, we're going to move into a panel where we actually bring in different players in the agriculture business, from policymakers to private sector, think tank, but also other foundations and other players in the sector. So we can have an open conversation about what it takes to get the processing zone in Africa to become a reality across the continent. Now, join me as I welcome on stage our panel members, starting with Honorable Odu Ogbe, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development of Nigeria. Ms. Honorable Minister, join us on stage. I'd like to welcome Carlos Bocavele from Mozambique to join us as well. Carlos. And Dr. Mima to join us as well. Dr. Mima to bring in the private sector perspective as well. And last but not least, coming to us from Agra, Lead Diwe Sibamba from Agra to join us. Ms. Vice President, join us. Now, initially, we were supposed to have actually two panels. We have joined them together for a very simple reason. This is supposed to be a conversation between the private sector, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Agriculture, and other players of the sector. That's why we want to combine them to have an open conversation. Now, obviously, you'll get a chance as an audience to weigh in at some point to make sure we can hear your contribution and your comment, as long as we keep them short so we can get as many people as possible. Let me start with the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria, Honorable Minister, just to set the scene for us and take us through, in the case of Nigeria, some of the policies and initiative you're actually undertaking to making sure that the processing zone in Nigeria not only become a reality for the country, but also what are some of the strategy, what are some of the policies that you're undertaking? And that way I will then move to the private sector and other players. Honorable Minister.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my predecessor in office, whose name I'm sure you remember, he has just left here, president of the ADB. He started an elaborate program for agro-processing centers before he left. Now, shortly after he left, we got into a depression in our economy. And so the major investors slowed down. But things are picking up. We are back again to get that program going. But in between, we realized one problem. For agro-processing centers of that nature to succeed, infrastructure becomes such an important issue, power and transportation in particular. For a large country, moving goods from one far end of the country to another can become very costly, especially heavy items like cassava, yams, and grains of all kinds. The second issue is the nature of roads. Whether it's by river transport or by road or by rail, you do need an elaborate system. Otherwise, by the time you've moved raw materials from a place of production to a processing location, and you move it back to the market, your profits have been heavily eroded by costs. In the interim, we began something we call LIFE. LIFE is a program, an acronym for Livelihood Improvement Family Enterprise. We decided as a ministry to begin to procure small-scale industrial, agro-industrial machines and sell to young people and clusters of women in rural areas to add value to their produce. Cassava, small rice mills, vegetable oil mills, fruit juice processing, tomato paste processing, and so on. We decided that as a government because there are two problems standing in the way of young people and widows and women in the villages. Access to credit. Where do you raise money in economies in Africa where averagely interest rates stand at over 25%? 25% is certainly impossible to apply to any processing outfit to make profit, especially if you're in a competitive market world where Other people are borrowing at 2-3%. That's one challenge in Africa, and I'm sure most of you recognize this. We now procure machines and as a government sell at very low discounts, very high discounts to young people and to women in clusters and communities. As a result, a great deal of output has been recorded in the last 3-4 years, in rice in particular, vegetable oils, and we're moving up to tomato paste and fruit juice processing. The big ones will turn up later because those who want to invest in those sectors are big players who have access to credit, probably at favorable rates outside of Africa. And that's the problem we face. Big players can't borrow in Africa today at the current interest rates and hope to make profit. That's one of our challenges. But we're working on this. The results are coming up. We have reduced rice importation by 95% in 2.5 years. And Nigeria's consumption of rice is 7 million tons per annum. 1 million tons of rice will fill up 33,310 trailers, 30-ton trailers. That's 1 million tons times 7 is Nigeria's consumption. We depended on imports from Thailand and Vietnam. That has reduced, and the cost to Nigeria in the past was $5 million per day for nearly 30 years. In another year and a half, we'll stop importing rice altogether. The same thing will follow in other crops. But that's where we are, and in particular, youths and women who suffer terribly in our villages are the main targets of this program called LIFE. Right. We're hoping and looking forward for support. Right. I thank you all.
Honourable Minister, before I move on to the other speakers, because one of the objectives of this platform is really to foster partnership between Minister of Finance and Minister of Agriculture. Maybe you could share with us a little bit, in the case of Nigeria, how is that relationship coming along with regard to supporting the initiative you just talked about?
We have, the Ministry of Finance is sympathizing quite strongly with us. We have a program in the country called Special Intervention Funds, levies on certain agricultural activity, especially importation. The funds from there are kept aside to intervene in strategic sectors in agriculture. And the funds are kept with the Minister of Finance. We also have the Natural Resources Fund, which is 2% of the nation's income kept aside for intervention in this regard. Therefore, the ministry has been very helpful, and particularly the central bank. They had to come forward with what they call the Anchor Borrowers Program, which is lending money to farmers at 9%, which is the best thing they've ever seen in the last 40 years. Right. And being a farmer myself, I can assure you that borrowing at the current cutthroat interest in Africa is the biggest challenge to agricultural productivity in Africa. We've got to find a way around it and not be tied down by the dictates of normal economic theory about interest rates not being lower than inflation rates. If we work on that, we'll remain where we are forever. Right. And our population is growing frighteningly. Right. If we don't do anything, Africa will be in serious turmoil in the next 10-15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Now we're going to move away from West Africa and go to Southern Africa. Still stay with policymakers. And Carlos, I'm going to turn over to you. I know you've told me a couple of successful examples. There's a processing in your country. Could you share with us those examples, but more importantly, what are some of the ingredients for success from a policy point of view, but also from a strategy point of view in the case of Mozambique? Carlos. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. And talking about agro-processing in Mozambique, it's taking place under a broader context of what we call national development strategy, which encompasses 5 pillars. In that 5 pillars, we have one which addresses essentially agro-processing issue, market access. We think that market access will help to make the bridge for the small farmer to reach external market. It also helps to unlock other possibilities for small farmers to increase productivity. because to supply the external market, the farmer has to learn and accomplish with stringent specifications that the market demands. And I also consider that this market access pillar to work, it also have linkage with the other 4 pillars. One which is productivity increase, other one is sustainable management of natural resource, that to consider also the issue to take into account the climate change in agriculture practice. And also we consider essential the issue of nutrition. As we had the President mentioned here, the critical issue in Africa, in the world of 54 million of children under nutrition. In that context, I would like to share some key success cases. The first industrial zone in Mozambique was Matola one. In Matola, we have an investor from the United States who set up a cashew nut processing plant for using the raw kernel to make it, putting flavor and export to Europe and the US. And that is a successful case. Why I'm sharing this? Because he's buying from the bigger primary processing companies, transferring the production from Nampula province all the way to Maputo, and then processing and export. And once I was talking to him, he says, it's fantastic because cashew nut is produced by small farmers, but is consumed all over the world in very rich markets. And as the second issue I would like also to comment is we have also Nakala corridor, which is also a processing zone, agro-processing zone, and we see a movement of investors trying to set their investment there, and also they addressing a shift from the traditional processing to a modern one, which is the exploiting the cashew nut husks, which is not traditional in Mozambique. Right. This will also open window to a new kind of investments. And lastly, I think this to upscale these movements of agro-processing, we need also to consider complementary policies. Because small farmers, to respond in terms of quality specification, they need to access funds. So our experience is we set up what we call guarantee funds. With the guarantee funds, we supply credit to big processors. With that funds, they commercialize small farmer production. To say that indirectly, instead of putting money in the small farmers, which is difficult, we're putting money to bigger so that they can market the small farmer product. This synergy for me is critical. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, Carlos, let me stay with you. But very quickly though, you talked about there's a movement of investment going into agro-processing. What is driving it as far as your government is concerned? Is there any particular policies or actions or incentive you put forward to make sure that there is a movement of investment into agro-processing? Talk to us about what Mozambique is doing specifically on that.
The major reasons, first in Mozambique we have a policy of exception, general exception. Anything that happens in agriculture in industrial zones is adding up at these general incentives of exemption of all equipment imported to set up a plant. And the second issue, the land policy. We we can say it's for free, because what they pay in terms of what we call duat, the right of use, is less than $1 per hectare. So that's indeed a big incentive.
All right. Now, Mima, let me turn over to you. You bring in the private sector perspective. You heard two governments that are extremely committed in terms of policies, but also commitment to work in the private sector. Is that good enough? Are there other issues that should be raised or concerns do you have from a private sector perspective? Talk to us as a private sector player.
Certainly. Thank you very much, Sheikh. And I will speak both as president of IGD with our multiple various companies involved in the sector, some of that are here, and I also speak from my own personal experience as chairman of Schaefer Group that has been involved in rice and sugar industries throughout the continent. A couple of key things here, and I think this really hits at where the importance of the processing zones and what more could be done. It's all about being competitive. And I keep repeating that. I'm going to repeat it till I turn blue in the face. Togo is not competing with Benin. Togo is competing with the world. We have to remember, it's one world, one market. So what, in the end, can governments do? I guess they should ask and say, listen, if we have the God-given soils, the sun, the water, the whole zone that the President Adesina was speaking about, 60% land is not being used, what does it take? This is where the public side must come in and really incentivize and give us the hand for private industry to come in. You know, when you speak of irrigation, for example, the big works have to be done by some sort of public funding. The infield irrigation, private capital will pick up. If you speak of the processing zones, the idea is to give the opportunity for the processors to become competitive. Now, how does that tie in very much with the producer? There's always the discussion, the argument, the producer doesn't have a market. What is the market? The market is the processor. So when you concentrate the processors in the same zones where the producers are, you're creating a market. Now, in fact, our interests I mentioned before, how are they aligned? If you think the farmer has a problem finding a market, think of the capitalist that put up the plant that then cannot run efficiently 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because there's not enough throughput. How many times Schaefer, that never does farming in the US, we only put up sugar and rice mills, end up farming in Latin America or in Africa especially, because we don't get enough throughput to feed our factories. So this is where the interests are fully aligned. We create markets, and we really would look to civil society, development community, work with the small farmers to become larger farmers to support us. And in the end, it also answers the issue asked about financing. Earlier, first by the Minister of Nigeria, and our colleague from Mozambique came right back and said, absolutely, commercial banks will lend to the factories because you've got something you can put up as guarantee. And those factories need the throughput. They will gladly pass through the financing to the producer. Right. That is really the key, is how do you align those interests where government is very key. And the other part, interest, and I don't want to go in that discussion, you got the Minister of Finance here, but when you have governments putting out government paper at 28, 30% interest, of course commercial banks are not going to lend to farmers at anything less. So it's a matter of crowding out. Right. That's another thing that could be done.
Right, but Mima, let's just be absolutely specific, because you heard the two representatives from the government talking about putting up incentive, building infrastructure, attracting private sector. Is that good enough as a private sector player? Anything else that you think should be done by this government?
Well, first, let me just finish out. The processing zones, you know, I've seen processing zones that basically hectare is identified, a wall is put around it and said that's a processing zone. That's not a processing zone. Processing zone must have power so that we can process, must have water, must have these infrastructure facilities to come in. Because if I have to put it, it's no longer attractive anymore. So that's the first thing, is to make it a real processing zone. Secondly, the question becomes, and this is where the policies come in. I'm sorry, but I mean, US, Europe, there are certain market protections. I mean, there are policies, there are pricing policies, whether you like it or not, that impact on the farmers. So what do the African governments also do to make it then, for us as African farmers and producers and processors, more competitive? Those policy issues externally. The other part that can really, really be very much done without even worrying about the external part of the world, and that is the regional markets, allowing produce to move across the borders. Because you know what? Most of the food scarcities are created when governments are afraid of the food scarcity. They block exports. I have a bumper crop. I can't export the bumper crop because my country wants to be sure the protection is here. You think next year I'm going to do bumper crop? Of course not. I just got cut off from a nice market. So let's be careful when we use this food security on a country basis versus on a regional catchment basis.
Right. All right, let me turn over now to Dr. Lee Diwe. You bring in a global perspective, AGRA, looking at Africa as a whole, looking at processing zones. Talk to us about some of the best practices, some of the good things that have been done that could be replicated, but also some of the bad things that have been done when it comes to processing. So maybe you can bring in that global perspective of the continent. What are some of the good stuff been done right?
Thank you, Sheikh. I think the starting point is maybe to just bring AGRA into the room so that we are all on the same page. Right. We've set ourselves a very ambitious target of transforming agriculture in 11 focal countries to a permanent path of food security and doubling productivity in staple crops. Now, staple crops are very delicate crops because when we talk food security in Africa, for governments, the priority is for their nationals to be fed. Mm-hmm. So now, if you are now bringing commercialization of staple crops, you have to have your mathematics right. Mm-hmm. So as an alliance, we rely on partnerships. And as AGRA, we're investing in government, we're investing in systems transformation, we are also investing at farmer level through market-led integrated consortia. We've mapped in the 11 countries where we are working, 4 in West Africa, Mali, Burkina, Nigeria, and Ghana, 5 in Eastern Africa, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and 2 in Southern Africa, Malawi, and Mozambique. We've identified key staple crops where we are saying these are the priority value chains where we are going to invest. Mm-hmm. We've gone in and formed consortia at farmer level where we are looking at input supply. How do we improve technologies that the farmers are using? We've looked at production technologies, both for improving productivity, but most important for reducing post-harvest losses. And then we've looked at the market pool. How do we have aggregation centers that can be making sure the quality is preserved, the quantities are available so that the big business can be able to pull these as off-takers. Now, coming back to where is the role of partnerships? We are looking at best practices, and we are saying, as AGRA, we are in the 11 countries. How do we develop best models for policy, for technology, and for inclusive finance, which the 2 countries have ably amplified as the challenges? Mm-hmm. How do we develop partnerships that will allow us to align these investments, to also leverage on the limited finances that we as AGRA are putting in, but most important, to develop models that can be taken to scale, both in the 11 countries and all the other countries where we are not working. And so it means it's a small amount of money, but meant to catalyze and drive the sector using best practices that we are learning from.
All right, let me actually, since you work with most of these countries in terms of agriculture matters, you talk about partnership. How has been your experience, relationship between Minister of Finance and Minister of Agriculture at the country level? It's been good, bad? What are some of the lessons that you can share with us?
It's an interesting journey. As I've said, at farmer level, we're already establishing these consortia that start from input side to farmers as producers, to aggregators, agro-dealers, and marketing. Mm-hmm. And maybe to bring a live example into the room, we've got an exciting alliance that we have partnered with, the Farm to Market Alliance, where we've brought in 8 organizations on the input side. With the finance side, we've got Rabobank, we've got IFC. On the production side, we've got Yara, Bayer, Syngenta. And on the off-taker side, we've got World Food Programme, and Grow Africa is also participating. And as AGRA, our interest is, can you go in with the consortia I've described as farmer level to allow these farmers and small, medium enterprises to ride on these established systems so that we can grow their businesses, but also allow our farmers to access affordable and fair markets, both on the input side, on the financing side, on the post-harvest management, but also on the off-taker side. And we are working on this journey. We've started in Tanzania now. We are moving to Kenya, and we're moving to Rwanda this year. And the exciting thing is that we've been able to build in Tanzania 3 local companies that are already participating in this platform. We've been able to train up to 200,000 farmers on best practices that allow them to have quality staples as produce that can be taken up by these international companies, but also to bring in our own local companies, both as input suppliers and off-takers, to participate in these platforms. And the whole idea is models that can be taken to scale, both in-country, regionally, and Africa-wide, based on best practices.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to our panel members. Now, I'm going to come down here because you've been extremely patient, and I'm sure there are tons of questions and contribution from the audience before we go back to our panelists. But I'm working toward the Minister of Finance of Uganda. You're the missing link on the table there. So what's your take on what you heard so far?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I can't speak about agriculture and I stop. Because it's my passion, it's my mission, it's like my livelihood. In Uganda, the colonialists distorted the whole concept of agriculture. If, when I was in school, primary school, if you committed an offense, they would give you a hoe to go and cultivate. So farming from my generation was seen as a punishment. But we are trying to reverse that now. When you tell a young man you go into agriculture, let me tell you what he tells you. He says, agriculture is for the uneducated. For the educated is a mere hobby. You are not sure about the markets. Then he says, what about weather? Then diseases and pests. Agriculture, pooh. That's what a young man somewhere in the rural part of Uganda will tell you. But I want to tell you, some of us have a different perception. You know, Uganda, we have discovered oil. And I often tell the youth that if you want to know the inexhaustible oil, is agriculture in Uganda. The hydrocarbons will get exhausted, but agriculture will remain ever and ever. And I tell my children, I say, children, if you want to do a business that would outlive you, go into a food business. As you heard our president say here, can I have somebody who has not had breakfast here? Hands up. Anybody who has not taken anything since morning, unless you're a Muslim and you are fasting. If you're fasting, I can understand. So, you can see, no single day will pass without putting food in the tummy. So it's the business that will outlive you and outlive your grandchildren and grandchildren. Therefore, my take is that agriculture is the basis. In Uganda, the mission that the president gave me when he made me Minister for Finance is to industrialize Uganda. And I have said I will industrialize Uganda basing on agriculture. Agriculture is going to be the anchor of industrialization in Uganda, according to my program. I don't want to speak too much, but all I want to say, please, my fellow policymakers, let's make sure that agriculture becomes the anchor of development of Africa.
Excellent.
It is possible, it is doable, and it can be very easy indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me see other hands that would raise. There you go. I see a hand here. Go ahead. Can I get somebody to help with the microphone so we can circulate it? Please. Go ahead. Can you state your name, your organization, and keep it short if you don't mind? These questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Natangwe Ithete, Deputy Minister of Finance, Namibia. The topic is very, very important to some of us who live in Southern Africa, who were colonized by, of course, by our neighbor, South Africa, but not the current South Africans, the minority white South Africans. So please quote me right. Don't quote me wrong. We were colonized by the white South Africans. So the issue here, to be honest, Dr. Simbanda there did not note the agricultural activities that are taking place in my country, simply because we do not have the land. That's the reason why she could not take any note. But there is agricultural activity going around my country. It's just that the people that are currently involved in agricultural activities are the wrong people, are the people that make us poor. This is honest. Are the people that constitute about less than 20% of our populations and owning more than 80% of our land. So the indigenous people of Namibia, I don't want to speak about South Africa. I'm speaking about my country, Namibia. The indigenous people, which are more than 80% of the population of Namibia, are owning less than 20% of the land. We do not have the land. We are 28 years of independence. Of course, we are the ones governing ourselves. But how do we govern ourselves without the land? I, therefore, in short, requesting Africa to unite and join us in getting our land back. Right. We know how to get it, but we know if we do it ourselves, it's not going to be easy for those that have the land. Right. So please, Africa, join us and help us to get our land back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, get our land back. I'm going to move to the other side. Can I get somebody to help me with the microphone? There we go. Go on the other side here, please. Again, may I insist just we keep it a bit short so we can get as many questions as possible, please.
Yeah. I am presenting. We are in the private sector. My name is Ayed Noordin, and I am the chairman of Eagle Ayed Group. I'm speaking especially concerning Tunisia. The first president, Bourguiba, when we get the independence, is telling there is no independence then without food and feed independence in our continent. These are the first things. The second, how are the tools? We are speaking about the tools to promote the agriculture. The government is operator. It has not been never as is regulator. It never have been as operator. Operator is the private sector. The private sector, I follow what you are telling. At the beginning, we start by private agriculture. It doesn't work, and come the cooperative. It doesn't work, and we return to the private sector.
Can we get to the question, the comment quickly, so we can like to get one?
Yeah,
please.
The question, we
Go
are
ahead.
speaking about the agriculture. We are speaking about who is working to the agriculture. We spoke about technology, but we didn't speak about the workers, the training of the people, how to provide it at the sector of agriculture, the people work. In fact, you can have technology, you can have the captor to check drop by drop the agriculture,
all right, I think
but
we
don't
get the
have
point.
the right people. And especially, I am speaking about the supervisor. We get this experience in our life, and in Tunisia, the first thing was training and what is the tool that we can give it at this agriculture. We created the National Bank of Agriculture in Tunisia.
Excellent. Thank you very much, because the capacity is important. Can I get more comments here? We'll go back to our speakers to react to what they've heard so far. On the back here, let's diversify actually the microphones and get in the back.
Thank you very much. My name is James Gakuya from Kenya. My area of concern is Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria has a history of a treaty between East Africa and Egypt, which is totally blocking Kenya from utilizing the freshwater lake from Lake Victoria. In terms of irrigation, we can only depend from that particular lake. So my concern is, at what time maybe this treaty can be renegotiated so that we can use this waterway for our irrigation.
Right.
Thank you.
Excellent. Let me turn over now to the Minister of Finance of Rwanda, who just joined us. Minister of Finance, this is a dialogue between the Minister of Finance and Agriculture. And if you can react to what you heard so far from the perspective of Rwanda.
Thank you so much. I joined a bit late, but I think everyone is aware about the importance of agriculture globally and in Africa in particular. For us, we are trying to move from subsistence agriculture to market-oriented agriculture by improving productivity, by improving technology, but recently, most important, by involving young people. Because the farmers are getting a bit old, with the universal access to education, you may not have people ready to practice traditional agriculture. It is a good opportunity because young people want to be involved in agriculture, but in a different agriculture, in the agriculture we want. So with skills, but we need to facilitate them. We need to avail the land. We need to ease access to finance and to create environment to attract more young people into agriculture. And we have now reduced about thousands of young people, skilled young people who are now in agriculture, trying to actually to help cooperatives, to help farmers, but with a business mindset. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I think we're going to go back. You raise your hand? Did you raise your hand? All right. Go ahead, just quickly.
Thank you.
Back to you, okay.
This is Pap Cham from Value Chain Development and Agro-Industrial Processing Zones.
Pap, can you stand up so we can see you, please?
I don't know if you want a comment or a contribution.
As long as short, I can take the comments, but quickly.
Yeah, I think listening to you guys, the first thing I got is that we know each other, every bit, piece, and parcel of what needs to be done. The question is that none of these things done by itself alone would yield anything, because it's an issue of aggregated critical mass of activities that need to be interfaced and brought together. And I think building on agriculture, it makes sense because you need to build an economy on its strengths while mitigating its constraints. The question is, where do we fit all this initiative in the global perspective of building value chain that going to all converge in the place you're going to call processing zones with these competitiveness platforms, vocational training systems, value chain financing down the line, and everything. That's a core issue, because once you do it, you have a perspective, then you need to know how to build each and every segment of these all activities to be interfaced.
Thank you very much. I think one last comment here from the lady next door, and we'll go back to our panel. That's it.
Hello, Hanan Morsi. I'm the Director of Research at the African Development Bank, and I'd like to take the opportunity to ask the panel about two issues that for me would be really interesting to hear from a policy perspective what can be done. One is the issue of the impact of climate change on the sustainability of agriculture, which is going to be increasingly a challenging issue going forward. The second is the issue of land fragmentation and its impact on access to finance, and what type of measures can actually be taken to address this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is a great question. Let's see if you remember all of them. One was with regard to how do we deal with land issues. Question number 2 is about capacity building. 3 is about water resources management. And 4 about value chain and agro-processing, the impact of climate change and agriculture, and the issue. access to finance as well. So this is a great question from the audience. Let me start with the Honorable Minister. If you can take maybe one of those two questions, and we'll move on to the next.
You spoke about land, fragmented land ownership.
Right.
What we do is do cluster arrangements where farmers in particular communities, and usually because of the climate we have in Nigeria, there are crops that do well in certain areas and won't do well in others. So if people are good in groundnut production or sesame seed, then we concentrate our activities in those areas and give them the inputs they need, from the seeds to the harvesting to the threshing. Because simple machines like that are a major challenge to people. I have seen families where the entire family sits to break groundnuts by hand. You can imagine how much labor it takes. So you give them a thresher, and that solves their problem. And these threshers are mobile. You hook them onto the back of a truck, and they go from village to village, and you can aggregate there and do what you want. As for climate change, it's a serious problem we face in Nigeria because the desert, the Sahara Desert, is coming down at nearly 0.5 kilometer per annum. Whole villages are sometimes swallowed up by sand dunes. We've been working on what they call the Green Wall, which was an ECOWAS program. It hasn't moved very fast, but now we're targeting like 10 million trees a year to try and build a wall across. It's a very slow program, but climate change is a reality. So we're looking seriously at irrigation. We have 2 big rivers across the country and smaller streams. And this year, between now and the next 2 years, we're looking at least at 1,200 earth dams to store water from one season to the other to enable us to do 2 crops. Now, you talked about aggregation and value addition. Yes, these things don't happen in isolation. First, the farmers must have the right kind of seed. They must be taught how to test their soils, which the Ministry of Agriculture does for them. We have improved our fertilizer blending facilities because before now, there was a lot of emphasis on NPK 15-15-15. There is no soil. There are no 2 soils 2 kilometers apart that use exactly the same type of fertilizer. There is soil leaching, there are all kinds of things. So you check which farmers don't know how to do, and then give them the right fertilizer because we have 30 fertilizer blending plants within the country, owned by the private sector, who blend for particular zones and crops. What you blend for cocoa in the southwest is not what you do for cassava in some other location. Right. So all that is coming along to make sure that the farmer makes money on farm and is even taught how to plant. I've been in the US and in Spain, and you see how farmers plant maize 1 meter apart on the ridge. And then you go to Spain or the US, Nebraska or Iowa, and you find the farmer is planting his maize 6 inches apart. So on 1 hectare, he has 18,000 stands of plant, and in Africa, you have 7,000. Right. How do you make profit from both and compare? These are the challenges we face. There are many. We try to deal with as many of them as we can.
Thank you. And Carlos, over to you very quickly. Some of the questions. Which one do you want to take? Maybe the issue about land as well?
Thank you. First, I want to comment on what the gentleman from Tunisia raised on this issue of human capital. Indeed, what we have been doing in this issue of training our farmers, we have a special program called PITA, Intensive Transfers of Technology. We also have the platform of outsourcing, where this big investor, in their business plan, they have to include a certain percentage of their production outsourced from small farmers. And in their interaction, they also train the small farmers. And this has been successful with some investors. And the second issue on dispersed ownership of land, we also promote small farmer associations. Lastly, the access of finance, we privilege the use of guarantee funds to reduce the cost of capital from commercial bank, the interest rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Mima, quickly, what's your reaction to what you've heard so far?
I want to really hit on this technology, skills training, R&D, because, you know, and I'm glad the minister mentioned Iowa. We happen to have actually visited Martin, some ADB people joined us with a number of business folks to Iowa State just a couple of weeks ago. And when you see what a university does with its extension services, with the R&D it does, with the training it does, and then you say African farmers and processors compete. Minister mentioned the maize, they're reaching 27, 30 tons a hectare. We're lucky we get 5, 6. With better irrigation, maybe we get to 10. So what do you do? This is where government has to come in. This land extension, land college extension systems of the U.S., the training, it's a magic bullet. I mean, it is a bullet. And that is how you tie in business, private sector, with the public sector. Most of the R&D that's done in the end, I mean, is actually being done out of the universities and commercialized. Right. So I would suggest even within the processing centers, the processing zones, that whatever the crop is that is competitive in that region, that some sort of process, some sort of R&D is done right there. The improvement of seeds. As the minister again said, you know, fertilizer here, 2 hectares down the line is a different fertilizer. Somebody's got to do soil analysis. That's centers. This is where the agro-dealers come in, reaching the last mile. It's absolutely critical because they know how to mix the right seed with the right fertilizer and get to the farmers. So it's really all about how do you make the African farmer more productive, to be more competitive, to be able to scale, to then get to be able to compete with the rest of the world. Right. And the land titling is very simple to me. That we're gonna, and I spent my whole life in Africa. We're gonna have to get somehow beyond this communal and 14 different ways that we title land. At some point, somebody's gonna have to own the land, and also come out of Eastern Europe. That didn't work either. You have to own the land because the good farmer is obviously going to acquire more land to become a larger farmer. Right. The farmer is not such a good farmer, why should he or she not be able to sell that land to go ahead and do something else? Because in the Rockefeller study we did, there's 17 different skill sets, professions between the farm and the fork. So go on and do something else. We can't be 95% farmers on this continent. Right. That's the key. That's called scaling. That's called getting competitive. And that's where titling land is absolutely critical. And the agro-dealers, they're the ones that are going to really reaching that last mile. Absolutely.
All right. So Dr. Lidway, last but not least, what's your reaction to what you've heard from the audience?
I'd just like to pick up on the agro-dealers component. And as AGRA, we are investing a lot in training these SMEs. We see them as a great opportunity for jobs, but also for extension. And we are really looking at agro-dealers who are providing inputs, those who are aggregators who have built their own warehouses and are storing, but also those who are processing. And before we invest in this, we do an organization capacity assessment where we benchmark the skills of these agro-dealers and then go into technical assistance programs. And we've just partnered with the African Development Bank and IDH on a facility where the bank is unlocking $50 million for industrialized cassava. And as AGRA, in partnership with Rockefeller and IDH, we are putting together a $10 million technical assistance facility. Right. And we are saying unless these SMEs are capacitated, they will not be able to unlock the $50 million facility that the bank has put out. So that's where the partnerships come in. That's where the capacity and skills assessment comes in. But that's where the improving the capacity of our SMEs to come up to global standards with chosen value chains comes in, and that's where we're investing as AGRA.
All right, well, Dr. Lidway, let me stay with you so we can wrap up this conversation. If we go back to our topic, which is really about processing zone, going back also to the African Leadership for Agriculture, if there's one big idea, one big suggestion, one big recommendation, what would it be for you, from you actually, to the leadership, so we can focus on that when it comes to processing zone? And I'll go through the next panelist as well. One big idea, what would it be?
Big one is that we need government, we need private sector. But private sector blow the whistle as to what are the bottlenecks so that we talk to government to unbottle those. They want the investments, but the communication is never direct and clear. What are the challenges for taking your investments into the chosen countries for chosen value scales. Then government, do your bit and unlock those challenges. Then we have no problems.
Excellent. So Mima, what is your big idea toward the African leadership for agriculture with regard to processing zones?
In the processing zones must be these sort of extension services, because the processing zone processes something. That something is not grown in the processing zone. It's grown all around, right? So that is where that training has to be maybe focused and centered there. Those might be the pilot farms around the processing zones that then do the extension to the farmers, and we're growing those farmers. That is the key. The R&D part, maybe that's in universities, but you've got to be able to get local R&D on the improved seeds and how they're applied. I think the other part, you know, processing zones, I mean, agriculture by definition is in the bush. The bush is usually far away from the markets. And if you don't have the proper roads and transport and ability to bring in competitively the product to market, whether the market is your own internal market, a regional market, or port to export, you're stuck. You cannot be competitive. So that is a component that needs to be in there. The last part doesn't touch with processing zones, I forgot earlier. The climate change, you cannot, I mean, climate change is going to be happening. We can put up green zones, we're going to fight like hell, but it's going to, the climate change is happening.
Right.
What you can do is start to control and manage water. We didn't speak about irrigation, but I think it's an AfDB study, I keep quoting, and I got to find where it is, but it's something that under less than 10% of the God-given water coming from the sky is any way utilized on this continent before it returns back to sea, either for water or irrigation. So how do, if you can't get to 27 tons per hectare of maize, but you get to 10, well, guess what? Iowa has only one season. They cannot do 2 seasons. We can do 2 seasons if we manage water. Now we're at 20 tons per hectare. We're getting there. That's how you become competitive.
All right, let me turn over to the Honorable Minister from Nigeria. What will be that big idea, big suggestion?
Well, 2 things. We need to intensify education and research. The farmer begins with the best seeds, and then is taught how to plant using extension officers. He gets the soil test, and he gets the best yields. Then he can supply the processor in the processing zone. Now, for that, we have 3 universities of agriculture in Nigeria, 17 research institutes, and 31 colleges of agriculture.
Right.
And I have just said to the universities of agriculture, which come under my management, do more research on seed and seedlings, because you can make money from there. We have a severe shortage of seeds in Africa, the right kind of seed to plant. Most farmers will plant the seed their grandfathers planted, and they harvest some and hang to dry and then replant. The yields are getting worse and worse. And finally, my appeal to the ministers of agriculture and ministries of agriculture. If we wait for the private sector in Africa to access enough funds to go into processing on the scale we expect, we'll have to wait for the River Nile to finish flowing before we cross. Governments have to intervene, look at strategic sectors, support the private sector in procurement of these machines, even if they are giving them at the lowest interest rate. Because Africa is under terrible pressure with population growth. Nigeria will be 450 million in 30 years. That will be 1/5 of the population of the world at 9 billion. Now, if we don't move quickly enough, there will be no peace and no stability. And the same thing will happen all over Africa. Governments have to get involved directly and not wait on the banks, because the logic of the banks is not the logic of the farmer.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And Carlos, what would be your big takeaway, your big idea?
Thank you. In my view, one critical element is human capital capacity building. And secondly, planning of policy based on evidence. The demands will vary according to real world circumstances. Thank you.
So, can we just give him a big round of applause for the good ideas? Let me see if you remember actually all those great ideas. I'm sure somebody's paying attention. I can't say no to Minister of Finance, so I'm going to give you the microphone. I'm almost confident it's going to be a short one, Minister of Finance, but let me come to you over. He's our governor. We can't say no to him. Huh?
So to come back to this subject, we were in Cote d'Ivoire in November. This subject, we turned it around, broke it into shreds. The question I want to raise, the problem in Africa, we like to talk. The question which I'm asking, who is going to be our chief whip? Who will be our chief whip to ensure that the African governments implement things that we are talking about?
Right.
Please help me, Mr. Moderator.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And someone is telling me, so the next year we can come to evaluate whether we are moving in the right direction or we are not moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. So some great suggestions. I'm sure somebody is paying attention to make sure that we, next year when we meet again, we don't have to go back to the same recommendations. So recommendation number 1, we need to actually foster the partnership between private sector and public sector going forward. Number 2, we need to really encourage domestic research, domestic R&D. Number 3, we need to actually do a better job in managing our water resources across the continent, because without water we can't actually process. Number 4, we need to intensify research across the continent going forward when it comes to agri-processing. Number 5, we have to be proactive as government. Don't wait for the private sector to come in, as the Minister of Nigeria had said. And last but not least, we need to actually make sure that capacity building is as serious as investment, because without the capacity, we can't actually process the way we want it. And last but not least, let's make sure that next year when they come back, somebody who's in charge of making sure we follow all these great ideas. So can I a big round of applause to our speakers, but thank you very much for your contribution. Thank you. In fact, talking about the next step, talking about following up, the next session is precisely about that, because I'm going to invite the Vice President of Agriculture of the African Development Bank to join me, as well as the Regional Director for Africa for Rockefeller Foundation. And I'm going to grill them a little bit in terms of where do we go from here, from this great conversation that we had. All right, let me turn over to you, Mamadou Biteye. You are actually supporting this initiative by providing lots of financing. And Jennifer, at the African Development Bank, you're actually hosting this initiative. So together, you really have the keys and the ingredients for success. May I get your attention, please? Thank you. Mamadou, from what you heard so far from the conversation, if you think summarize quickly, what are some of the key actions you think going forward that we have to put in place to keep the momentum? Can I get your attention, please? Excuse me. Shh. Thank you. Let me turn over to Mamadou. From what you heard so far, what are some of the 3 major actions that we need to put in place to make sure we don't actually lose the momentum, so next year we're going to be not talking about the same issues over and over again?
Well, thank you very much. I think that we have heard many ideas, both specific to how can you advance agro-processing zones and industrialization, but I think also we heard many other themes that are broader, and some of them given to us by President of AfDB, like how do we put this network to address issues of malnutrition, loss, etc. So basically, for me, I think that what is, and to the Minister of Finance of Uganda's point, how are we making sure that we prioritize? Because this year's, or this particular session, in my view, is specifically to get the steer from these ministers of agriculture and finance, to say, among all the many issues that have been addressed today, which ones do you want us to focus on in the next 3 years so that we have clear deliverables in 3 years? Because if we think that we are going really to work on everything that has been said, that's not going to work. So really, I think that in this conversation, we are going to prioritize 2 issues, maybe maximum 3, that we're going to focus on with clear metrics, clear deliverables for the next 2 years. So I don't want me to be the one setting that agenda. I think it's really for the ministers whose network it is actually to really set that agenda.
Mamadou, you can't get away like that. It's too easy. I'm going to go back to you, push a little bit. From what you heard so far, knowing the sector, knowing the discussion been taking place, what are the 2 issues you think are major issues we need to be focusing on?
No, I think that from what we've heard, I think that 3 things really comes to me very strongly. I think that the issue of productivity comes again. The yield gap is big, and we've heard some examples given. How do you address that? That's number 1. Second is that how are you going to put the required infrastructure and prerequisites, including training and others, to really make the sector attractive and linking with and enabling actually private sector to come in, and how do you facilitate that in terms of policies, incentives, and other measures that can facilitate that.
Right.
We can reflect also around that. Take what are the best practices and bring them. But I think that also we need to have like some kind of targets. Can we say we want to take a few value chains and say in these value chains we want to move within this time of period yields from X to Y? Are we going to say in terms of agro-processing zones we need to facilitate, X amount of funding coming in, and we want to see X amount of funding coming in, and we want to see X number or Y number of agro-processing zones that have started as a result of this. Right. Or maybe we can see some of policy changes or that we can learn from and actually also share with others. Right. So I think that those are really key issues. And the last thing, what I've heard also is about research and knowledge, because that is really important. How are we making sure that there is increased research on these areas, but also the result of this research is not staying in drawers, right. How they are getting to the farmer, right. So that it can support all of these activities. So those are like, for me, some of the key issues that I've heard.
Thank you. Now, Jennifer, let me turn over to you, because you guys have a bigger agenda, which is one of your high 5 is actually feeding Africa. So processing zone is just one of it. So just talk to me about looking at a big picture, looking at some of the priorities in terms of processing zone. What do you see as the 2 or 3 major things that we need to be focusing on?
Well, I think first of all, this was a nice conversation, but one of the big things we need to do is to take it to the next level. Because we can continue coming together and having great conversations among ministers of agriculture and ministers of finance, but the power in this room for Africa is not to be underestimated. If we can get everybody here kind of singing from the same hymn sheet, it would be incredibly powerful. In a way, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter what we do, right. But almost it doesn't matter what we do as long as we all agree together what we do, and then we go and we do it. Because the list is long. I mean, you heard Mamadou say. I could also add gender. Let's make sure that we bring women into the process. I look at David Stevenson in the front row or second row, and I know that, these are the sorts of things that really matter. And let's start with some of the key issues, and we know that land and all of these things are really important. Now, if you take it back to what we're doing, I think everything we want to do, and we have an announcement to make, I think.
Yes, breaking news coming
afterwards. But, to make sure that as we work on this Leadership for Agriculture effort, that it links very clearly to what we're trying to do on the Feed Africa space. So if you think about Feed Africa, it's a lot of what Mamadou was talking about. It's basically looking at the whole value chain. How do you go from increasing productivity through to training up the people that you need, to do these things, to transforming and really moving up the value chain, right? And so we have efforts all along the chain. One of them that's been mentioned several times is the Technologies for Africa's Agricultural Transformation. And this isn't so much about new research, and we're working with IITA and others, but how do you get that research off the shelves and to the farmers at scale? And a number of us are working together on this, and we're very excited about it. AGRA, and so on and so forth. I'm sure that we'll be working together with Rockefeller very soon, given that they are sort of the godfathers of the green revolutions of the world, together with the World Bank. So that's one thing. I think, another is definitely around making sure that we take care of post-harvest loss. We have many efforts around this because, you produce a lot more, but then what happens to it? How do you warehouse it? How do you control the prices on these things? Look at cocoa. We don't have to get into a whole story, but there's a lot of things that can be done. And then finally, how do you transform? And that's really about the discussion today. The staple crop processing zones for us are very important because it's a way to sort of bring all these things together to the rural areas. Right now, young people leave the rural areas either to go to urban areas or to leave. And the whole goal is to say, how do we make thriving rural areas throughout Africa? And that's what the staple crop processing zones are about. And my team was just kind of prepping me before to say, we're going to do them this year, or we're planning to anyway, as long as they get approved by our board, in Togo, DRC, probably Ethiopia, and we're hoping for Zambia as well. And we have a number of countries that we're discussing. I mean, just to give you a sense, Senegal, Tanzania, Mozambique, Guinea, Madagascar, Rwanda. Almost every time we think about it, another country's coming. Why? Because once you can bring the hard and soft infrastructure into the rural areas, you can do so much. It allows you to create businesses, thriving businesses, and this is where you bring in the business. You bring in, and you need, by the way, it's a business case because you need anchor businesses, otherwise it doesn't work. So these are the things that we're working on. If you look again then here at the Leadership for Agriculture, what we're going to try to do over the next few years, and working with support from Rockefeller, and I'll let Mamadou talk about that, is we'll put together, really a secretariat that will allow us to follow up on this on a regular basis and track that stuff. And I don't know if we'll really be able to become the whip, as the Minister of Finance of Uganda asked, but at least we can provide some sort of mechanism for allowing us to move forward. And I think then we all need to be very difficult with ourselves and make sure that we keep moving together in the same direction.
Well, look, I think at this stage, everybody's dying to hear that great news that the two of you have to share with us. So turn it over to Mamadou. I understand you're back to make an announcement after this and sign something. Take us through that great news that you want to share so we can keep the momentum.
Yeah, no, actually, as Jennifer said, we've had with L4Ag several moments. This meeting is actually the fourth meeting. I think that at some point it was really important to put in place a structure that can actually take clear objectives and really work with them or work on them to deliver between meetings, so that this is not just a meeting after meeting and we get that. So to enable that, we are going to sign, after this session, a partnership, a technical cooperative agreement that would provide resources to the African Development Bank to actually set up that capacity, to set up the secretariat of L4Ag and to manage this network, but particularly to deliver on the objectives of this network and its members. But I want to say that it is a very modest funding. So it is really meant to be also catalytic funding. And I think that one thing also for me is important. It's really also testing whether this forum really responds to a need. And I think that if it does respond to a need, then we can really use it and deliver on that need. But if it is not, then I think that we can move on. But at least we are taking the opportunity to provide that catalytic funding to enable it actually to start providing that work. But I must say that it is not just around L4Ag. This technical cooperative agreement is really strategic. It is also looking at jobs for youth in Africa. It is also looking at how we can collaborate to deliver on the youth jobs. And I think that what was said earlier, how industrialization can really provide the opportunity actually for jobs and bringing youth into the agricultural space. So that's what this technical agreement is about.
I think it deserves a big round of applause, actually, for that great news. Jennifer, obviously it's a great news. So what do you feel or think about a good idea that actually Mamadou has just shared with us, which you're about to sign? What will happen in turn within the bank to support and keep this momentum?
Well, I think the proof will be in the pudding. Mm-hmm. So if it's going well, and if I think all the people in this room feel that that we're managing well, then I believe that we will be able to continue to raise funding. Our idea is to set up the secretariat that will then follow up on a number of the issues here. I think we will start really by doing a survey to make sure that we're covering the right issues, and then make sure that we then continue to follow up. And you know, my sense is that by creating a thing, right now we talk about it, but it's not a thing yet, right? So with all of us working together, also with IGD, once we actually create a sort of an infrastructure that we all can go to, that will allow us to get people thinking about this in a different way, because we know that there's so many things that we've been talking about ad nauseum, right? I mean, I come back to that. This conversation's a lot like the one that we had last year. We know what the issues are, but if we come together, I think maybe we'll stop talking about those issues and then talking about how we're resolving them together. And I think that's sort of my dream of putting this together. I mean, this is allowing us, we will really be able to get some heavy hitters together who are going to help us to push forward and work together with all of you. And then, you know, my hope is that in November, which is when we're going to have the next meeting, which is going to be, I believe, in Abidjan, and then again, I suppose here, or actually next year at it'll be in an African location next year, that we'll be able to really take stock on what's happening and plan together how we continue to move forward.
Well, maybe, Jennifer, one last question. I mean, you've done your part of the bargain. The Rockefeller is bringing some resources, but the other players, which is Minister of Finance, Minister of Agriculture, and the players, what is that you expect from them in terms of commitment so that together we can make it successful?
Action as well as talk?
Action, not talk.
Well, no. I mean, action as well, because I think talk is very important, that we all agree together the sorts of things that need to happen. But then, you know, to go back and make sure that these things happen, because we're going to take everybody to task, right? I mean, we'll start measuring everybody's activities, and we know that the moment is now to galvanize ourselves for African agriculture, for Africa to take a huge leap. The moment is now. Let us not lose the opportunity, and we're going to be measuring, and we're going to be following, and we're going to be working together. It's a partnership.
Excellent. So, Mamadou, what do you expect from the government, Minister of Finance and Agriculture, now that you provided actually the support?
No, what I would say is that, you know, when we talk about agriculture, African agriculture development, and maybe of any sector, we probably all have a responsibility and a role. But they are the ones who have the mandate. So, you know, so we need to work with them. And I think that they need to see this forum and platform as a support to them. And actually actively engage with it. So let us know how this can be helpful to you, and then we can drive it to be helpful to you in really leading the transformation this sector needs. Yeah.
I think that being asked, the Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria raising, Honorable Minister, let me come over to you. Here, I come with my mic.
I'd like to just say in passing that nobody should live here believing that all is talk. No, it isn't.
Right.
If you had a bit of time to come to Nigeria any minute from now, I can show you 21 giant rice mills which sprang up in just 2.5 years. 21. Some have a capacity of 300 tons of rice per day spread across the country in the rice zones. So things are happening. I was talking about cashew nuts. I'm a cashew farmer. And all the cashew that goes to Vietnam and India for processing comes from Africa. Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, Mozambique, Tanzania. The raw cashews go to India and Vietnam. They are processed and sent to Europe. So Africa, Nigeria does about $700 million a year from raw cashews. Ivory Coast does about twice that much. if we were to bring machinery to process the cashews in Africa, we'll create hundreds of thousands of jobs. But then the private sector doesn't have the means, $2-3 million to buy one set of machines, 20 tons a day, to bring into Africa and install, because access to finance is a problem. So my ministry is bringing in 3 giant lines this year. We pay for them, bring them in, and sell them to the private sector at a discount. And they can pay us back over a period. We don't care how long. Because we recognize this fact that access to credit, and nobody should underplay it. If you want to borrow $3 million in Nigeria today, the security the banks want from you will be impossible to meet. So we're saying, let the Treasury move. If you identify a strategic sector like rice, we're spending $5 million a day, we can't afford it anymore, and there was no reason for it in the first place. Rice farmers have moved from 5 million to 12.2 in just 2.5 years. Right. So creating jobs, creating value, and actually working on it, not talking. So I think we should have a peer review mechanism. Whatever we say, let's go around and check, is this real or is it just talk? I assure you will see things that will please you.
All right. So there you have it, a Minister of Agriculture who talks the talk and walks the walk.
Mamadou, can I just
Jennifer, one final word?
Just one thing about that that's very important. I think that's such an important point, especially because Africa has so many good examples. Why are we looking elsewhere? I mean, it's good to look elsewhere as well, but I love that idea. So I would love for that to be a huge part of what we're doing, and well noted. And peer review mechanism, that we're going to need your support for, though. So.
All right, so I think there you have it, a minister who talks the talks and walks the walks. By showing an example, I'm not sure about you, but probably maybe the next African Leadership for Agriculture should take place in Nigeria, so we can go and see the work of the minister and see the good work he's doing in Nigeria. But thank you very much for sharing that testimony as we're wrapping up the session. So on that note, I'd like to thank our 2 speakers. First of all, for announcing us great news. I think it answers the question about there's a momentum we need to keep, and the resources are provided. Hopefully next year when we have another meeting, we'll come back with some actions as opposed to just talking about policies and investments and incentive. So that brings us to the end of the special event of the African Leadership for Agriculture. So thank you very much to all of you for having been extremely patient and for your contribution. And enjoy the rest of your annual meeting. But thank you very much. And my name is Ibrahim Adiong. It's been delightful to be your moderator. Thank you. Thank you.